Thank you, Paula, for that nice introduction, and thank you for coming out this evening. Though it's storming, here it is very peaceful. And welcome to people if you're watching online. This evening, I feel it a privilege for me to give this talk because on Saturday night it will be a full moon. Not any ordinary full moon. It is, astrologically speaking, an important full moon because it is the time that the moon is closest to the earth, this full moon. So that's quite significant. But to Buddhists all over the world, it is of a different significance in that it commemorates some very, very important events in the life of the Buddha. In particular, the enlightenment of the Buddha. But in the tradition that I am involved with, the tradition of Southeast Asia, what they call the Theravada form of Buddhism, it commemorates in actual fact three important events in the Buddha's life. The birth of the Buddha, the enlightenment of the Buddha, and the final passing away of the Buddha. Supposedly, all took place on the full moon of May. All occurred on the full moon. Now that is rather, it's quite intriguing, maybe questionable, but it's of no great consequence whether or not historically it is accurate. Because it does have some very important significance in meaning rather than as a historical fact. And I will go into that in a little while. So this evening what I wanted to do, as we are so close to the full moon, is to commemorate this special occasion by talking about the life of the Buddha, just very briefly. It's not going to be a lecture on the biography of the Buddha. And then also talk about what he actually taught, because that is the most important aspect of Buddhism as far as we are concerned. What did he leave for us? And so to begin with, of course most of you may know some of these very basic facts about Buddhism and the Buddha's life. You know that he was born in, we say, India. In actual fact, where he was born is in present day, it's the southern portion of Nepal, in a place, Lumbini. Lumbini is now no longer a town or a village, although in the time of the Buddha it was still very sparsely populated. The story is that in actual fact it was more like a forest or a grove, and that he was born under a tree, which is very significant as well, because for Buddhists all the important things happen under trees. So the story is that this child was born on the full moon of May, around, let's say, the middle of 6th century BC. The date is quite, uncertain. Some scholars put it at around 563 BC. And he was born in a good family, princely, they say. He was a prince. And lived a comfortable life, of course, as a prince. And was married, had a child. And at the age of 39, it is said that he had some kind of traumatic experience in his life where he became aware of some fundamental aspects of the human condition that really shook him up, pulled the carpet under his comfortable feet and made him think more deeply about life and his existence and the purpose of it and what he was doing, so much so that he actually made a radical shift, a radical change in his life. It is said he left his home renounced his status as a prince and all the finery of that sort of life, and went off to become a mendicant, they say, a samana. A samana is the word means one who makes oneself peaceful. So it's one who's striving to be peaceful in every way and to arrive at the deepest level of peace. And there were many different sects in the time of the Buddha, many different groups. If you wish to say, the formal religious beliefs of the time were centered around Brahmanism, where the Brahman priests performed rites and ceremonies and rituals and sacrifices, and they held the priestly status over the people. Hinduism was not as we know it today, so it wasn't Hinduism, it was Brahmanism. But in addition to that sort of religious environment, there were many other ascetics who lived outside of the towns and villages, more in the forests, who sought various ways of disciplining and training themselves through austerities, renunciation, through special practices, through meditation, in order to try and arrive at some spiritual awakening or spiritual growth. So Siddhartha was the name given to this prince when he was born, wish-fulfilling. That is a name that is fitting for the son of anybody, for the father anyway, and the mother. It's your wish come true. You have a son, an heir. And so Siddhartha, having renounced his home life, and went off to become this ascetic, shaving his head as a symbol of renunciation and putting the robes of, patched robes of the mendicants of the day, went and studied under various teachers, learned various practices, followed various austerities, and for a number of years made progress, obviously. He made progress. He was quite an accomplished student. Wherever he went, he seemed to be much beloved by his teachers, but not quite satisfied as yet with his attainments or realizations or understandings. And so he went off and did some very, very austere practices of we call mortification. It's any practice that mortifies the body, hardship, renunciation to a degree that really does harm to the body. And he practiced to such an extreme degree that he came close to death. And only then did he really come to terms with the realization that that was not the way for him to really attain any spiritual purity or enlightenment. And again, something changed in him. He had this recollection of a time when he was sitting under a tree, a rose apple tree, as a child. And he sat there and became aware of his breathing. And as he turned his attention to his breathing, he became extremely peaceful and entered into this state of samadhi. A state of samadhi is just a very deep concentration where the mind withdraws from the sensory world, enters a state of unity, oneness, which is accompanied by bliss and rapture and joy. And he thought back to that and he said, wow, that was quite an experience. Maybe that's the way to go. That's the way to arrive at some real spiritual insight and understanding. And that was quite contrary to the beliefs and practices of his fellow ascetics, in that they thought that that was an indulgence in pleasure, because it is a state of great bliss. But Siddhartha, who at that time was not the Buddha as yet, he was still striving. In Buddhist tradition, they call him a Bodhisattva, a being striving for enlightenment. So he was striving. But he had that understanding that this type of happiness, this type of bliss, and happiness is different from indulgence. It is not the same nature as the happiness from sensual indulgence, which is the way of the world. This is the way of renunciation and withdrawal into a state of purity where the mind is unfettered by defilements, coarse defilements. So this is a delight or a beauty or a happiness that one can partake of. And maybe it is actually necessary in order to arrive at insight and understanding. So that was quite a radical shift from what was the common practice of the day, the common belief of his fellow seekers. And so he went and sat under what is now called the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment. At that time, I don't think it was called the Bodhi tree. It must have been called something. It's a fig tree. It's they call it Ficus religiosa, the religious tree. It's a big tree with big, beautiful leaves, very shady. And so he went and sat under this tree, and because of his training and what he had already accumulated in his practice, the skill, the knowledge, the purity of heart through virtuous living, and through his mastery of this meditation practice, it is said that on the full moon of May, at the age of 35, so this was a full moon in May, 35 years after he was born, at that night, he sat through the night in meditation, and just as the morning star arose, he had this transformative experience, which we call enlightenment. Now, of course, exactly what that is we will talk about it maybe, but only one who experiences it can really know. But we can talk about it. But let's say this, that it was a transformative experience whereby he had this direct knowledge and vision of truth that completely dispelled any doubt, any ignorance, any fear, any greed, any aversion, any confusion, any sense of him being an ordinary person with ordinary attachments and ordinary issues and ordinary investments in this or that situation. He experienced this tremendous sense of liberation. The enlightenment, the experience of enlightenment was the knowledge and vision of this truth, the experience of liberation, and the knowledge that he was free. And so this experience was quite, again, transformative, if you wish. Extraordinary is not even sufficient. It is said that after that experience, he stayed around that Bodhi tree, sat experiencing the bliss for 7 days, got up, walked for another 7 days, stood for a while. He spent about 49 days around that Bodhi tree, experiencing, savoring the bliss of his liberation, the bliss of his enlightenment. So, it's kind of special. Must have been something quite out of the ordinary. So that happened in a place on the banks of Neranjara River, and today it's like near Gaya. Bodh Gaya is the Bodh Gaya again, Bodhi, enlightenment. Gaya was the town, Bodh Gaya. So it's one of those areas in the Ganges Valley. All of these events took place in the Ganges Valley. That was the area where the Buddha lived. That is the area where he taught. That is the area where he passed away. It is said that after this 49 days, he thought of teaching so that others could also benefit from what he had discovered. And he traveled a couple of 100 kilometers, took him about 2 months, something like that, until he arrived and he knew this group of ascetics whom he had practiced with, 5 ascetics, and there he taught his first sermon, and they call that sermon the rolling of the wheel of the Dhamma, starting the wheel of this teaching turning so that it could be passed on to others, because every human being has within them the capacity to do this. And again, I will make special stress on this point in a little while. He taught these 5 ascetics, and they, in good time, not too long, because they'd also been very spiritual, mature human beings who devoted many years to a spiritual practice, understood, realized for themselves. And so that was the, if you wish, the transmission. It was not that the Buddha enlightened them, the Buddha taught something that resonated within them and enabled them to realize what he had realized. And so that was the transmission. And this continued for the rest of the Buddha's life, for the next 45 years. He traveled through the Ganges Valley region by foot. And wherever he encountered, wherever he met anyone who was interested, he would teach. This body of teaching that accumulated over a number of 45 years is vast. But its essence was contained in that very first discourse that the Buddha gave to those 5 ascetics. The essence of that teaching. The 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path is the core of his teaching. And regardless of all the years of elaborating and explaining and adding and various teachings, they can be contained within those 4 Noble Truths with the Eightfold Path. And so when some people kind of tend to be rather dismissive of this basic teaching of Buddhism, it doesn't do justice to the Buddha or to Buddhism. I think that straight after his enlightenment, you can say he's like at the peak of his, clarity and energy and, bliss, and he's going to give his very best teaching to these 5 guys. He's not going to save it for someone else. These are 5 ascetics who devoted themselves to spiritual training and were his friends. He's not going to sort of give them a second-class teaching and then save his really esoteric teaching for someone else. No, he gives the core, the essence, the kernel, the meaning that's important. So that first teaching is it's quite special. He taught for 45 years, and as I said, a vast number of teachings approaching the Dhamma, as it is called, from various angles, and the presentation quite often attuned to the needs of the listener, depending on whom he was teaching. And he taught people across the strata of society, from kings to beggars, women, men. An order of monks developed, an order of nuns developed, and his teaching spread and grew, and it became quite a movement, if you wish. A movement that continued not only to the end of his life, but because of his understanding of how to establish a teaching that can continue in time. In other words, he had disciples who also had realized. He established rules of conduct and ways and procedures for the monastic order to function. And the Buddhist monastic order is still the longest, the oldest living monastic order. It's intact continually. So it is, some indication of his, let's say, success in being able to establish it. a teaching or roll this wheel so it keeps rolling. But be that as it may, the time came at the age of 80 where his life came to an end at a place called Kusinara. And there, at the age of 80, the Buddha passed away on the full moon of May. So 80 years after that first full moon, he passed away. Now, my friends, the first question that often arises amongst us people who'd like to be skeptical is, why? How could it be that all these three events happened on the full moon of May? I don't know. But I will guarantee that in one sense, they did happen on the exactly same full moon of May. In actual fact, not only the full moon of May, but the same instant, if we understand the meaning in a different sense than a historical event. So when we say the birth, if we take it as a historical thing of Siddhartha being born as a baby, well, that's one thing. But the birth of the Buddha, that's a different thing. Siddhartha wasn't a Buddha. Siddhartha was, a Bodhisattva, a being striving for enlightenment. The moment of enlightenment, the attainment of that enlightenment, is when the Buddha was born. Buddha arose then. Buddha means the one who knows, the enlightened one. That's the birth of the Buddha, that moment of realization. So the moment of enlightenment is the birth of the Buddha. And it is also the death of the Bodhisattva, the being striving for enlightenment. He's dead. Why? Because it's been attained. There's no more striving required. The Bodhisattva is no more. It's the Buddha now. So in that sense, we can say that these three events, are the same moment. But historically, as a fact, in historical events, it doesn't matter whether they occurred exactly on this full moon of May. But because it is a way for us and for Buddhist people to gather and remember, I think it is useful. It's a useful, the full moon is a very significant event, and it was an older calendar than the solar calendar that we use today. It's a much more practical calendar in terms of, if you're out in the woods, it's easy to know when the full moon is, and when it's half moon, and when it's a new moon. So it's easy to notice the passage of time. So that was the significance of these three events happening on the full moon. Now the Buddha, he was quite radical in his teachings. Often, if you are a scholar of Hinduism or know something of Hinduism, it is not uncommon that Hindus claim the Buddha to be an avatar and just a continuation of the Hindu, within the Hindu tradition. But the Buddha, much like, often it is said that Jesus had no intention of establishing Christianity. He was, continuing teaching and being a Jew. But in actual fact, the Buddha was not silent on this matter. He was quite explicit in renouncing a great deal of the beliefs of the time, the practices of the time. And he was very much into reforming, changing, and establishing this Dhamma. That's what he called the Dhamma, which is this truth and the way to realize this truth. So he did see it as a radical breaking away from others understanding, others' teachings, others' practices. Not that he dismissed everything. He took what was useful, used what was useful, changed what was being used incorrectly, modified what could be modified, integrated. But the essence of his teaching was radical, new. So one of the very first things he did was to make his teaching very much a teaching pointing in. If you think of a cone, a cone with a point or an arrow, most religions point it out. Where do they point it at? They point it out, empowering that outside, be it celestial, be it godly, be it magic, be it places of power, symbols of power, omens of power, whatever. And Christianity is no different in its normal presentation. It's pointing to God. Well, Buddhism is a radical change from Brahmanism, pointing to Brahma with all the rituals and sacrifices in order to appease and to get favors. The Buddha was concerned at pointing in. His teaching is always pointing in towards here. Within this body and mind is to be seen, is to be realized the truth. So that's a radical shift from other paths and traditions. Within this fathom-long body, with its perceptions, feelings and consciousness, is to be discovered, is to be seen. Truth is to be realized, enlightenment, and each for oneself. So this is quite a change. He went to great lengths at empowering the human being who, from the beginning of the human race, has suffered from this terrible inferiority complex. And I mean, it's understandable. We feel so small, and nature and the universe is so vast, and we feel quite weak, that it is natural to look for protection, to look for that outside to help us. But that's why in the Buddhist tradition, accompanying the birth of the Buddha, it is said, again, this is to me, it's a symbol, it's not meant to be taken literally. It is said that the Buddha, at the moment of birth, stood up and took 7 steps to the north, looked around in the 4 directions, and made the lions roar. I am the greatest. I am the best. Not as a personal ego thing, it's a statement saying the human being has the capacity, the power to do this, can stand on his own or her own 2 feet and do this. So this is a very significant shift in Buddhism. Many of the practices of the time, it's a lot of superstition, a lot of rituals, and I'm surprised because now of course I work here at the Theosophical Society, and the Theosophical Society draws a great variety of people, and I am surprised at how much interest there is really in the supernatural, in this, but not that I am dismissing the supernatural, but how fascinated we are with ceremony or ritual or for protection, for whatever. again, the power out there rather than the power in here. The Buddha was, very clear on this, pushing it back onto ourselves. Empower yourself. This is where the power is. One of the very nice discourses, which is too long for me to read. I'm going to read another one this evening that's a little shorter and again makes a similar point. But this one was very good because I came here one evening for a talk on a Thursday night, and there was somebody talking about some of the Native American practices, and one of them is kind of acknowledging the different directions, the east, the west, and the north, the south, and above and below. And they had this practice in the time of the Buddha. It's very interesting to see that, because in this discourse, the Buddha is, in the early morning, he's walking for alms, and he comes across this young man, Mangala, and Mangala has just come up from the river for bathing in the morning, and he's doing these prostrations and various practices of chanting, paying homage to the 6 directions, east, west, south, north, above and below. And the Buddha asks him, what are you doing? He says, well, my father advised and taught me to do this practice, and I continue to do it out of respect for him. And I'm paying homage to the directions. And the Buddha said, well, it is good that you have respect for your father and still respect his guidance. However, that's not the right way to do it. That's not the right way to pay homage to the 6 directions. This ritual is not the right way. Well, I'll tell you the right way. And he gives this long discourse, and all it is each direction represents a group of people that you associate with. So east could be, I can't remember the specifics of it, but like east could be your mother and father, and west could be your wife and children, and so on, and your teachers and your workers, and those above you, those below you. And for each one of these groups, he teaches the proper course of relationship that has respect and mutual consideration based on compassion, based on virtue and generosity. And it's really a beautiful, this is how you really do homage, because you live a life that is paying homage to everything that you come in touch with, to everyone you deal with. And so he's taking this old practice that was, kind of a ritual, kind of an empty ritual, not bad, but it's a rites and rituals. And he makes it into a practice for really uplifting oneself and living a really beautiful life. So that's wonderful, isn't it? Another thing was there has been, because of this tremendous inferiority complex that human beings suffer from, the need for some sort of good omens, lucky signs, auspicious things that reassure us, that make us feel safe. And so, much the same, more so then than today, there was a great interest in this. And so I'm going to read this little discourse to you this evening, because it's a new spin on this. It changes. It's the Buddha's emphasis is not on the power out there. It's us and what we do. So this discourse is often chanted in Buddhist countries, and unfortunately as a ritual. But this is a pretty good translation of it, and it's called the Mangala Sutta, the sutta or the discourse on the. Now this Mangala means omen, good omen, lucky sign, blessing, auspicious. Okay, so what is auspicious? What is a good omen? What is a good sign? So, thus have I heard. The Blessed One, that's the Buddha, was once living at the monastery in Jeddah's Grove near Savatthi. Now, when the night was far advanced, a certain deity whose surpassing splendor illuminated the entire grove came into the presence of the Blessed One, and drawing near, respectfully saluted him and stood on one side. Standing thus, he addressed the Blessed One in verse. Many deities and men yearning after happiness have pondered on blessings. Pray, tell me the highest blessings, the most auspicious. What is auspicious? The Buddha responds. Not to associate with fools, to associate with the wise, and to honor those who are worthy of honor. This is the highest blessing. To reside in a suitable locality, to have done meritorious actions in the past, and to set oneself in the right course. This is the highest blessing. Vast learning and great skill, a highly trained discipline, and pleasant speech. This is the highest blessing. Supporting one's father and mother, cherishing wife and children, and peaceful occupation. This is the highest blessing. Liberality, righteous conduct, the helping of relatives, and blameless actions. This is the highest blessings. To cease and abstain from evil, abstention from intoxicating drinks, and diligence in virtue. This is the highest blessing. Reverence, humility, contentment, gratitude, and the opportune hearing of Dhamma, the teaching, spiritual teachings. This is the highest blessings. Patience, obedience, seeing of holy people and taking part in discussion with them at the proper time. This is the highest blessing. Self-control, holy life, perception of the noble truths, and the realization of nirvana. This is the highest blessing. If a man's mind is sorrowless, stainless, and secure, and does not shake when touched by worldly vicissitudes, this is the highest blessings. Thus, those who thus acting are everywhere unconquered attain happiness everywhere. To them, these are the highest blessings. So, it's a short discourse, but it's beautiful. I mean, what's auspicious? What's a blessing? What's a lucky sign? It's what we create, what we do. It's what we choose to do. And so this is, again, shifting the emphasis. In the contemporary emphasis of the time was looking for lucky signs, omens, and rituals, and sacrifices, and this is shifting all of that. No, this is more important. This is the path to security. This is the path to empowerment. This is the path to enlightenment. Virtuous living is the foundation. So these are some of the things that the Buddha did, which was, I say a reformer and a radical transformer of some of the common things of the time. Now, as to his own teaching, he was quite explicit. I mean, he had 45 years to elaborate on this teaching. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, I said, were the core of it. There was a nutshell that he gave once that is even briefer, though. Just a little nutshell. This too was given on the full moon of, not May though, another full moon, at a large gathering of monks. And the one nutshell, if you can't remember anything about Buddhism and anybody ever asks you, what's Buddhism? Is this nutshell. Not to do anything that is evil or harmful. To do all that is good, to purify the mind. this is the teaching of all the Buddhas, because Buddha is not a unique, not a singular thing. There have been many Buddhas, and there will be many other Buddhas. So it's a quality of enlightenment. So just this kernel is quite sufficient, but it takes a lot.
Could you repeat that again?
Not to do anything evil or harmful, to do all that is good, and to purify the mind. So he taught it many people at different times in different ways. And as I said, one of his realizations that he did act on before he's enlightened was really a deep appreciation that mere external practices, be they well-intended and even very hard to do, austerities, are not the way to enlightenment. The way to enlightenment is through training the mind. And training the mind is what he emphasized a great deal, not in isolation from the rest of the path, because the Eightfold Path has 8 factors, and 3 of them are to do with training the mind. He really stressed that it is only the well-trained mind that can realize truth. If the mind is weakened by its various defilements or various habits, attachments, its various preoccupations, the ordinary mind is going to be caught up in ordinary things. So he did emphasize the need for mental culture, the training of the mind. In one very important discourse, it's called the Transcendental Dependent Origination. And dependent origination is a basic principle in Buddhism. It's an underlying principle. Everything is dependent on conditions. Everything in existence arises because of conditions. That's what existence is. It's dependent arising. Nothing in existence is independent. Nothing in existence is in existence without conditions. So whatever experience, whatever happens, whatever arises, does so dependent on conditions. And in this discourse, the Buddha starts off from his first observation. When I told you that the Buddha, when he was 39 years of age, had that kind of this kind of traumatic upheaval, that he was willing to leave his comfortable life and go off to seek something. What was that? It is said that he saw old age, sickness, and death for the first time. He saw the nature of the human condition. He saw the nature of suffering. Human condition, existence, is basically flawed. That's what he saw. It's basically flawed. There's a basic unsatisfactoriness in it. It can never really be stable source of happiness and security. That was what he saw. And it wasn't a personal thing. It wasn't just my suffering. It was universal. Existence is like that. And in this discourse, he made an interesting connection. He said, dependent on seeing suffering arises confidence. Confidence sometimes is translated as faith. I don't like to translate it as faith because it's too close in our Western culture to belief, which is not, confidence is a better word, strength of conviction. Confidence? Conditioned by suffering, actually suffering and understanding something of suffering, there arises confidence. So that the human condition is what really can cause a shift in us. When we have some experience that really makes us question existence, life, we start, it's like we start wanting reassurance. Now, people, who has confidence? Who has real confidence? A born-again Christian has real confidence. Why? Anybody who's got complete faith in something has confidence. The question is whether the confidence is well-founded or not. So many people, when confronted with the nature of life, its uncertainties, its vicissitudes, loss, separation from loved ones, old age, sickness, pain, all the things that happen to everyone. We want reassurance. But here the Buddha says that if seen, these are not, it's not limited to you. This is the nature of existence. And if one has the good fortune to be exposed to some degree to a teaching, some spiritual teaching that points out the possibility of transcending, you arrive at a confidence that, yeah, I can do this. You're motivated to go forth and do something with your life, to take charge of your life, to take ownership. Not hand over power, not hand over ownership to someone else, to take ownership for your human condition and do what you can with it. And what can you do? The first thing is that discourse, beautiful. Live a life that's based on understanding karma, that how we live has consequences, understanding that we can create a better life through our actions of body, speech, understanding that we can actually shape the world to make it a little better, not perfect, better. So we have confidence to practice some sort of spiritual life. And if we practice this sort of spiritual life, conditioned by confidence, there arises joy, gladness. Again, it's difficult to translate this word pamoja. I like to think of it as self-esteem, or being at ease with oneself. Why is it so difficult for us to feel at ease with ourselves? One of the tortures that's been used quite often is to solitary confinement. Feed them, give them clothes. I mean, they're just not torturing physically. Solitary confinement drives people nuts. It's hard. Why? Why is it so hard to be with oneself? Because we don't have this sense of being at ease with ourselves. We don't like ourselves. We're afraid of something. There are too many ghosts haunting. So this quality of how do you arrive at being at ease with yourself? By being absolutely 100% perfect in every way? No. But it does require having taken ownership and responsibility for your life, having made the choices you've made and acknowledging, and taking that responsibility you're willing to accept. And if you've lived according to that understanding, you are careful in the way you live so that you are not afflicted by so much negative state of guilt and remorse. Guilt and remorse are a hindrance to spiritual practice. That's often why we don't have the sense of being at ease with ourselves. We suffer from a lot of guilt and remorse. A lot of it is for no good reason either. It's just because we're told. So Guilt and remorse are not useful for a spiritual path or a spiritual life. Acknowledging of mistakes is important. Taking ownership is important. Being willing to try and correct and make amends is important. But if you want to make progress, you've got to get beyond guilt and remorse. You've got to get into the state of doing and being better. And so, joy or gladness, this sense of being at ease with oneself, comes from this really understanding of oneself, the flaws, the good, taking ownership and making effort to be better. You have self-respect. You have a sense of being at ease with oneself. And you can meditate. If you don't have this, it's very hard to meditate. There's nothing worse than the people who come on a meditation retreat with a lot of baggage, because when you sit meditation, that's what you're faced with, yourself. People often say about monks and meditators how they're escaping. They're just escaping, weaklings. They don't want to stand up and face the world, just running away. But my friend, it's quite difficult to do. And I would challenge any of these brave confrontational people to go off and do a 100-day solitary retreat somewhere by themselves and not speak to anybody, because it's terrible if you don't have a sense of ease with yourself. Okay, so from this ability of being at ease with oneself, we can undertake practices of meditation where we are willing to go in, we are willing to work with what's there, we are willing to train the mind, and through training and practice we begin to develop skill that brings the mind to more peaceful states of concentration. Associated with those peaceful states, there arises great rapture, great sense of energy, like the people often talk about Kundalini. Kundalini arising is rapture. That's associated from the mind coming together in concentration. From this rapture, the mind can then go into deeper state of meditation, very tranquil, great sense of serenity. Conditioned by that, the mind can go into states of great pure happiness, a happiness that is not at all associated with the sensual or sensory world, and enter samadhi. It is through happiness that the mind enters samadhi, not through torture, not through pain. It is through happiness. Conditioned by happiness, there arises samadhi. And samadhi is the mind that now is fit for the task. How much samadhi do you need? Just enough to break through the veil of delusion and realize truth. Conditioned by samadhi, there arises knowledge and vision of things as they are. Conditioned by this knowledge and vision, this insight, there arises disenchantment with the world. Conditioned by disenchantment, dispassion, the relinquishing of attachment. And that is vimutti, freedom. And that is the path of the Buddha. That is what he taught, that's what he did. And every human being has the capacity to do this. But, my friends, just like every human being maybe could climb Mount Everest, not all of us are going to climb it this lifetime. But do not dismay, at least we can walk. Let's do more walking. Let's do more, kind of just good look after ourselves. We may not reach the pinnacle, but we can still be on the path that the Buddha so generously gave. And nobody can stop you from being a Buddhist, and nobody can make you a Buddhist. Nobody. It is not something that is given to you or that any ceremony makes you. It is something that you do. So thank you for being so attentive, my friends. This is a reflection on the Buddha's birthday. Saturday will be the full moon, the birthday of the Buddha, and it is year 2556. On Saturday, the beginning of 2556 in the Buddhist calendar. I will be happy to take any questions if you've got any. Thank you. Yes, well, we'll just get the microphone to you and then you can ask.
We don't have any on the web right now, but I had one quick question. When you gave that nutshell, when someone asked the Buddha for the teaching in short, the way that I had heard it, he had said, do good, shun evil, and purify your heart. You said purify your mind. Is there a distinction or?
Chitta, the word chitta in Pali can be translated as sometimes as heart, sometimes more often as mind, heart. It refers to, I mean, the word heart obviously doesn't mean the organ, the physical organ. So you're talking about your emotions, but mind is the more often used translation for it. Not to think of mind as just purely intellect. It is to purify your essence of the consciousness, if you wish, your views, the way the mind sees and understands, rather from ignorance through insight, rather from the base of me and my needs and my interests. There's a radical shift.
Thanks.
Thank you. That was wonderfully put. I'm so. I just had a question about the Mount Everest comment that you had made with going up to the mountain. Would you say that everyone could attain getting to that mountain, though? That it's not it's not limited to them not being able to. It's just whether they or a person would want to.
I would be reluctant to say one way or the other, because what I usually say, is there are only two factors that count: is what you bring to it and what you put into it. Now, what you put into it is what you're talking about. If you're really, if you're really sincere and dedicated and strive and put effort and train, that's what you're putting into it. But what you bring to it is also a factor, and that is, where you're starting from, your past. It's certainly the potential is there. It can be done. Whether, obviously not everybody can do it in one lifetime, otherwise it would have probably happened. It's rare. I mean, let's say that when we read the Buddhist scriptures, often there is reference to, this, and it had this often mention about people becoming enlightened, as if it happened quite a lot in the time of the Buddha. Was that because of the power of his teaching and his presence, or just that a lot of people were very mature at that time? To be quite honest, from my own experience, and limited as it is, but still sufficient, I would say, in that I have lived in many monastic communities, Buddhist tradition anyway, in a number of Buddhist countries, and it's very, very rare. I mean, the vast majority of people, even those practicing diligently, are not enlightened, or don't seem to be enlightened, or don't claim to be enlightened. So it's from my position, I would say that it is quite rare, but it is possible and it can be done. And the only way to find out is each person must verify this for oneself. The truth is, I mean, it's not that it's hiding. The truth is. And so the path is being pointed out. If one has some confidence in that path and then applies oneself, there's a good, there's a good opportunity. Another one of the blessings is association with the wise and wise teachers and people who've trod the path before us and are very clear on it, that is a big factor in support of us doing it.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
I have two questions, and they're kind of opposite each other. My first one is that I've always seen ritual of a way of putting myself into a meditative state. Does that correspond? I was trying to figure out, I know I look like I was drawing, but that's how I think. It's like that. And I'm trying to figure out if that's how you would see that, or if you would see it as a problem. And then the second problem is with the self-esteem, which goes the other direction. I don't know if you want me to wait while you answer that first one.
Yes, the first one is quite easy. I mean, ritual can be a skillful means, because like the practice of meditation is like a ritual in that it's got a, it's a technique. But it's the understanding that's associated with what you're doing rather than empowering outside. You know that this becomes a skillful means when it's a means for you to arrive at something. The power is coming from you, so we call it a skillful means. And in Buddhism there are many, has evolved many rituals as well. Chanting is very common, and chanting can be a beautiful ritual. Devotional practices can be very, uplifting and generate a positive energy that is, it's very conducive to a positive state of mind that can make more progress on the spiritual path. So rituals, we would like to think of as skillful means if they are done with, it's the understanding behind them. What distinguishes rites and rituals that are superstition and rites and rituals that are skillful means is basically you, the understanding you have about it. Is the power there or is the power here?
Thank you for clarifying that, because you confused me. And then the second part is the self-esteem, that humanity has this self-esteem issue and our lack of confidence. And I've always believed that that's a core thing with all humanity. And even, no matter how confident a person appears, they're sometimes just hiding that. Do you think that it's possible that that lack of self-esteem, because I'm like the opposite, I like to go away from people, because I oftentimes feel that that's where that lack of self-esteem comes. And if that's the case, can we just then give each other a higher self-esteem? Well, get it from, give it to others as opposed to just going inward. Do you think that that disagrees with what you're saying? Did I say that right?
I don't think it disagrees from what I understand, in that if we treat, when we treat people with respect, we're acknowledging their esteem. So in a way, we're encouraging self-esteem in them. The way we treat each other, if we really have respect for ourselves, we will have respect for others. It doesn't mean we like everything about others or that we like everything about ourselves. That's not the point. Or that we're perfect or the other person is perfect. Often that's why it's like to see, if you wish, beyond that, or to see that the flaws and still, still realize the potential there. But as far as, if self-esteem, I don't want to make too much of it, but I was trying to come up with a translation of this word, which literally is it's joy, but it's not. It's kind of, it's something that you feel good within yourself. That's what you feel good within yourself. So it's what you could say it's self-esteem, or it's at ease with oneself. You feel good within yourself. You feel the sense of you're worthy, you're worth, you're of worth, if you wish. So that's the quality that is important, I think, because as long as we are afflicted by self-loathing or guilt, remorse, all those negative things, they are like black clouds. They just will prevent us from being able to go further. Any other?
question?
This would probably be a topic for a whole nother lecture, but I was curious, you're talking about that progression of meditation through the understanding and eventually leading to the letting go of grasping and the freedom. Do you know a good source that you could point us to learn more about that?
Well, there are any of the teachings, any of the books on Buddhist meditation, or this book, What the Buddha Taught, it's a classic. It's a very good book as far as explaining some basic Buddhism or important. Basic is the wrong word. The essential Buddhism, and it's got some discourses in it. As far as if you want a book on meditation, like in-depth explanation of the progression, I would recommend the Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond. And they sometimes carry it at the bookshop here. We have a copy in the library downstairs. It's by a friend of mine. It's a really, really in-depth exposition on Buddhist teachings and Buddhist meditation in particular, and this progression. So mindfulness, bliss, and beyond.
Well, thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Your talks are always so thought-provoking and interesting, and thank you very much. And thank you, audience, for joining us this evening. Please come back next Thursday when Tim Boyd will talk to us about the value of no-thing or nothing, your choice. And do we have a question from the? Oh, hold on. One more question from the web.
I'll give you the short one first. And does taking ownership of mistakes reduce the karma connected to those mistakes?
It's a good question. It certainly, what is karma is a dynamic thing. We cannot think of karma as, just fixed little lumps. Karma is dynamic in that every moment we create karma. The karma that we create now somehow or other does interact and either modify or strengthen some past karmas. So in terms of what we do, if we're taking ownership and doing what we can to make amends if necessary, and learning what we can from it, I think, yes, what it will do is it will, in effect, what was done, the consequences, whatever they're going to be, may be, but you're not adding anything negative, and you're possibly adding something that may reduce the negative consequences of it. But certainly it's a way of, psychologically and emotionally resolving. So that's the important thing, it's the resolving. Some karma may still have consequences that are negative. It's like the story of Angulimala. It's an amazing story. Angulimala means, Anguli was is the little finger. So this is, he had a necklace made from the bones of little fingers. And because he was told to do this act or this, well, I wouldn't call it practice, but he had so much faith in this one teacher, and this teacher, out of some spite or some, whatever, told him that the only way he would teach him and the only way he would make progress, he'd have to kill 1,000 people first. And so he was kind of a murderer, a robber, or a murderer. And each time he killed somebody, in order to keep track of how many he'd killed, he'd add the bone of the little finger on his necklace. And the story goes on that after he'd killed 999 people and he had this necklace, he encountered the Buddha. And the Buddha, with his presence and power, and really inspired him, and he became a disciple of the Buddha, became a monk, and started to practice. And he had a really, really hard time practicing because, he had all these memories to live with. And so the Buddha told him, you should repeat this verse. And actually, the Buddha told him to repeat this verse in the village to someone. Since my birth in the noble life, I have not harmed a human being, or I have not harmed any being. And he said, well, I can't really say that because, I've actually killed 999 people. And the Buddha said, yes, but now you've abandoned that and you've entered into this new life, a monastic life, and you have not. And so he repeated that saying, and it had truth. And he practiced and he became enlightened. Now, having become enlightened, though, he was stoned to death. We went on alms round to the village, and the villagers, still recognized him. Oh, that's that bandit, and they threw stones and sticks, and it is said that he was severely injured to the extent that he died. So that the karma of his past still reached him, but even though he was enlightened. So with karma, it's kind of difficult to say. And all I can say is the karma, to be really interested in it, is the karma we're creating now. And so when I take ownership and I come to terms and I clear, that's the karma that's important.
We have another lengthy description question here, but it also deals with karma. Assuming that all that is alive, is not the path of all living beings of all types, known and unknown, to be on the path, whether they are aware of it or not. Life is the lesson of karma. If we do not get it right, we will be given any number of future lives in which to get it right. Is this so? And is all life for the purpose of spiritual evolution?
I think so. There is experience is the only teacher, and it does not allow any dropouts. And it is true that in Buddhism we talk about many lives. And until that happens, where we see what the human condition is, what the existence is, and we're really motivated to go, we keep coming back. But life is, karma is a teaching. That's why we're still seeking. Everyone here is seeking. Yes, I do believe that that is ultimately the only way out. The only way out of this, the wheel of samsara, the realm of birth and death. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being so patient and attentive. And I greatly enjoyed myself. I hope you found some benefit from my presentation.